Most people never think about what happens after midnight. They close their eyes, pull the covers up, and let the world go dark around them. Safe, still, completely unbothered by whatever is moving in the hours between dusk and dawn. They surrender to sleep without a second thought, trusting that the world will hold itself together while they're gone from it. And for most people it does. But not everyone gets that luxury. Not everyone gets to close their eyes when the sun goes down. Some people are still out there when the rest of the world disappears, standing behind counters with nothing but a register and a flickering light for company, sitting at front desks in empty lobbies where every creak in the floorboards sounds like a footstep, walking long, dim hallways past rows of closed doors, not knowing what's behind any of them. These are the people who keep things running while the rest of us sleep. The night shift workers, the overnight staff, the ones who sign up for the hours nobody else wants because the money is a little better, or the silence is a little preferable, or because the day shift was already taken. They clock in, they go through their routines, they make their coffee and check their systems and settle in for the long stretch between midnight and sunrise. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the dark brings something to them that nobody warned them about. Something that has been waiting specifically for the building to empty out, for the last customer to leave, for the parking lot to go quiet, for them to be alone. Welcome to Silent Fear. What you are about to hear are 5 true accounts from 5 real people, 5 ordinary nights that became something else entirely. These are not legends. They are not stories passed down through whisper chains until the details blurred into myth. These are first-hand testimonies from men and women who clocked in expecting nothing more than a slow, quiet shift, and clocked out permanently changed by what they encountered in the dark. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. I read every single one. I want to know if you are up at midnight in a city that never sleeps, or curled up alone in a house surrounded by countryside, or watching this on your break in the back room of a building that feels a little too quiet right now. Tell me. And if you have not subscribed to Silent Fear yet, this is the moment to do it. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and join a community that understands exactly why some of us cannot look at an empty room the same way twice. Now, let's begin. Story 1. The Man in Room 12. Michael was 26 years old when he took a job as the overnight front desk attendant at a small roadside motel just outside of town. It was not a glamorous position, and he knew that going in. The motel was independently owned. Not a chain, not a brand name you would recognize. Just a 2-story building with around 30 rooms arranged along 2 exterior corridors. The kind of place that exists purely as a waypoint, a rest stop with walls. The guests were mostly travelers passing through, long-haul truckers who needed a few hours horizontal, the occasional family that had pushed their drive too far and needed to stop before someone fell asleep at the wheel. The turnover was fast and mostly anonymous. People checked in tired and checked out early, and nobody much cared about anything beyond a functional bed and a working shower. On most weeknights, fewer than a dozen rooms were occupied. The rest sat empty and dark, and Michael sat at the front desk with a laptop, a cup of coffee going cold, and the specific kind of quietness that only exists in small buildings at 3 a.m. He liked it, or at least he thought he did. He was not a people person by nature, and a job that required him to deal with a handful of guests per shift and otherwise sit in comfortable solitude seemed close to ideal. He had been on shift for about 2 hours the night it happened. It was past midnight, somewhere between 12:15 and 12:30, when the front door opened and a man walked in. Mid-50s. Heavyset, but not dramatically so. Wearing a gray flannel shirt that looked like it had seen a great many washes. And he was carrying nothing. No bag, no backpack, no jacket draped over his arm, no luggage of any kind. Just a man in a flannel shirt, walking up to the desk at midnight with empty hands. He asked for a room. Cash. 1 night. Michael processed the request the way he had processed hundreds before it. He told himself that cash guests were not unusual. Plenty of people preferred to pay without leaving an electronic record, for reasons that were almost always entirely mundane. He ran through the check-in protocol, counted the bills, assigned the man to room 12 on the ground floor, and slid the key card across the desk. But he noticed the eyes. Not threatening, not wild or unfocused, in the way of someone who was intoxicated or in crisis. Just off. Like the man was looking directly at Michael while his attention lived somewhere completely else. Like his eyes had been pointed in one direction while his mind was operating in another room entirely. Michael held the gaze for a moment, felt something he could not name, and looked down at his screen. When he looked back up, the man had already turned and was walking down the corridor toward room 12. That should have been the end of it. Michael made another cup of coffee, opened his laptop, and settled back into the rhythm of the night. He answered a couple of emails, checked the occupancy numbers, did the light administrative work that filled up the dead hours. Everything was fine. Everything was exactly as it always was. About 40 minutes after the man had checked in, Michael pulled up the room activity log on the system. He did this most nights out of nothing more than habit. Just a quiet, internal audit, verifying that the occupancy matched the records, passing the slow minutes between midnight and whenever things started to feel manageable again. He scrolled down to room 12. No key card activity. He looked at it again. Still nothing. The system recorded every time a key card was used to open a door, and room 12 showed 0 entries since it had last been cleaned and reset by housekeeping that afternoon. The door had not been opened. Not when the man went down the hall. Not at any point in the last several hours. Michael sat forward in his chair. He told himself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe the key card was faulty. It happened sometimes. Cards got demagnetized in wallets next to phones, and the guest had simply not bothered to come back to the desk for a replacement. Maybe he was still outside. Maybe he had gone to get something from his car. Michael checked the exterior parking lot camera. 3 vehicles, all belonging to guests who had checked in hours earlier. No new car sitting in the lot. No man in a gray flannel shirt standing anywhere in the frame. He had paid for a room. He had taken the key. He had walked down the hall. And then he had simply not gone in. Michael picked up the desk phone and called room 12 directly. He let it ring. 10 times, 12, 15. He set the phone down and stood up from the desk and walked down the ground floor corridor himself. The hallway was long and dim and completely quiet. Every door was shut. He stopped outside room 12 and knocked. 4 solid knocks and waited. Nothing. He called the room from his cell phone this time, standing right outside the door, and listened. He could hear it ringing faintly through the door. No movement, no sound of anyone stirring inside. He used the master key and opened the door. The bed was untouched. The pillows were still arranged the way housekeeping left them. The bathroom light was off. The curtains were exactly as they had been when the room was last cleaned. The room was cold, the way rooms get, when no one has breathed in them for hours. Michael walked back to the front desk and checked the cash drawer. He counted the bills the man had handed over and counted them again. Short. Not by a few dollars, but by enough to cover the full cost of a room. And when he held the bills up under the brighter light behind the desk, he could see that they were not right. The texture was wrong. The printing was wrong. The man had paid with counterfeit money, checked into a room he never entered, and disappeared into the building, all within 40 minutes of walking through the front door. Michael's eyes moved across the lobby, past the chairs, past the vending machines, past the small seating area near the window, and then to the utility closet at the far end of the lobby. The one that was always kept latched and shut. The one that contained the cleaning supplies and extra linens and the breaker box for the building's ground floor. The door was open, not all the way, just a crack. A thin black sliver where the edge of the door had pulled away from the frame, just enough to see that there was nothing but darkness inside. His first instinct was to walk over and close it. His second instinct, the one that may have kept things from going much worse, was to stay exactly where he was and not move. He called his manager. His manager answered on the third ring, groggy and confused. And after Michael explained what was happening, she told him to call the police and stay behind the desk until they arrived. He hung up and dialed, and then he sat down and watched the closet door through the lobby camera feed on the monitor at his station. He sat very still. The building was silent except for the hum of the vending machine near the entrance. He watched the sliver of darkness at the edge of the closet door, and he did not let his eyes leave it. For 6 full minutes, nothing changed. The sliver of darkness held. The building settled once in the wind outside with a low groan and then went quiet again. Michael counted his own breaths without meaning to. Then the door swung open. Slowly, quietly, all the way until it was flat against the wall. The man in the gray flannel shirt stepped out of the utility closet and crossed the lobby like a man who had simply been waiting for a bus. No hurry, no alarm. No acknowledgement of the fact that he had just emerged from a dark closet in a motel lobby at 1 a.m. He walked in long, even strides to the front doors, pushed them open, and disappeared into the parking lot. Officers found him 2 blocks from the property, sitting on a bus stop bench with his hands resting in his lap, and no particular expression on his face. They searched him at the scene. In the front pocket of his flannel shirt, they found a key card. Not the one Michael had issued him at check-in, a different one. A master key, professionally duplicated, capable of opening every guest room in the motel. When they asked him where he got it, he said he found it. When they asked what he had been doing in the utility closet for the better part of an hour, crouching in the dark 10 feet from the front desk, 10 feet from a young man, sitting alone in an empty lobby at 1 a.m, he said he was resting. He was charged with trespassing and possession of burglary tools. He did not resist. He did not explain himself further. What he had intended to do with a key that opened 30 rooms full of sleeping guests was never formally established, because he simply never said. Investigators noted that The utility closet where he had been hiding gave direct access to the ground floor corridor, which gave direct access to every room on that level. He had positioned himself between the desk and the rooms. Michael gave his notice 2 weeks later. He said what finished him wasn't the night itself, wasn't even the moment he saw the utility closet door open or the moment he understood the key card was a forgery. What finished him was something he thought about in the days after, lying awake and running it back through his memory. The man had been in that closet when Michael walked down the hall to knock on room 12. He had been in there in the dark, 10 feet away, while Michael stood in the corridor listening to an empty room, and he hadn't made a single sound. Story 2. The frequency. Emily is 31 years old, and for nearly 3 years, she worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour pharmacy in a mid-sized city. The pharmacy was the kind of place that exists in the margins of ordinary life, open when everything else was closed, quietly serving the people who needed things at 2 a.m. that couldn't wait until the rest of the world woke up. Prescriptions that had run out, cold medicine for children who wouldn't stop crying, things you bought at 2 a.m. not because you planned to, but because you had no other choice. The overnight staff was lean, just Emily on the floor and a pharmacist named James behind the dispensary counter. Most nights were slow in the way that made the hours feel thick and long. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the aisles. The refrigerator units along the back wall cycled on and off in a rhythm she came to know, as well as her own breathing. She knew the store the way you only know a place after you've been alone in it for hundreds of hours. She knew what belonged there. And about 4 months into her rotation, she noticed something that didn't. A man began coming in every Tuesday night, always around 1:45 in the morning, which was well past the last wave of genuine late-night customers, and deep enough into the quiet stretch that his arrival was always the only sound in the store. He was thin, somewhere in his late 30s or early 40s, with the kind of face that was difficult to remember after he left. Not ugly, not striking, just unremarkably present. He always wore the same navy blue windbreaker, regardless of the season, regardless of the weather outside. He would come through the door, walk directly down to aisle 4, without looking at anything along the way, stop at the 3rd section from the back of the shelf, and pick up the same bottle of vitamin C tablets. He would look at the label for a few minutes, turn the bottle over in his hands, and then place it carefully back on the shelf in the same position it had occupied. Then he would leave. Every Tuesday, for weeks, without variation. He never bought the bottle. He never bought anything at all. He never spoke to James, never asked for assistance, never paused to look at anything else in the store. He came in, went to aisle 4, held a bottle of vitamins, put it back, and left. The whole visit lasted between 7 and 12 minutes, depending on the night. When Emily mentioned it to James, he offered the kind of explanation that feels reassuring in the moment and less so in retrospect. He said overnight, retail attracted insomniacs, people who couldn't be in their own homes when the quiet got too heavy, who used 24-hour spaces as a kind of anchor. He said they got people like that sometimes. Regulars who weren't really customers so much as they were people who needed somewhere to be. It was probably nothing, he said. She believed him. She went back to her routine. 3 weeks later, Emily was doing a floor check late in the shift, straightening the shelves rotating stock, the kind of low-attention work that occupies the hands, while the mind wanders. When she reached the third section of aisle 4, she picked up the vitamin C bottle and noticed something on the underside of it. A small square of white paper, folded into quarters, fixed to the bottom with a piece of tape that had been applied carefully enough not to leave a visible residue on the shelf. She peeled it off. She unfolded it. In handwriting that was very small and very precise, not rushed, not scrawled, but deliberate and neat in the way of someone who had thought about what they wanted to say before they wrote it. It read, Tuesday, aisle 4. You smiled first on the third visit. She had smiled at him. She smiled at every customer who came through. It was professional courtesy, a small and automatic gesture of warmth that she extended to everyone who walked into her store, regardless of the hour, regardless of how tired she was. She'd smiled at him the way she smiled at everyone, and somewhere in the repetition of those Tuesday nights, something in that smile had been cataloged and interpreted and documented on a folded piece of paper left under a vitamin bottle. She brought it to James and held it flat on the dispensary counter between them. He told her they needed to reach the store manager, who was unreachable at that hour. He said they should document it. File a written report first thing in the morning. Emily said she wanted to go home. She didn't, though. She finished her shift and she came back. The following Tuesday, she called in sick. Not because she was ill, but because she needed to know something. She needed to know whether he came in when she wasn't there, whether her presence was incidental or whether she was specifically the reason he kept returning. The Tuesday after that, she came in and spent the entire shift making herself visible and deliberate near the front camera, staying in view of the lens at all times. She wanted a record of everything that happened. At 1:46 in the morning, the door chimed and the man in the navy blue windbreaker came in. He walked to aisle 4. He stood at the shelf. He held the bottle of vitamin C. Emily counted the seconds, watching from the periphery of the frame. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Then he picked the bottle up, walked to the front of the store, and set it on the counter in front of her. It was the first time he had ever purchased anything. He looked at her. His expression was entirely neutral. And then he said quietly, without any particular inflection, "I hope you're feeling better." He knew she had called in sick. He had noted her absence. He had registered it, processed it, and filed it alongside everything else he had been observing. The police were called that night. Through the pharmacy's loyalty rewards program, a card the man had signed up for 6 months earlier, providing his name and contact details in exchange for a member discount he had never once used. Investigators were able to identify him without difficulty. The rewards card had given him access to the store's promotional email list. The store's email list sent out weekly newsletters that included, among other things, staffing updates, shift schedule changes, and details about store hours and operations. He had been subscribed. He had been reading them. He had been cross-referencing every piece of information he received by email against what he observed during his Tuesday visits, building a picture of the store's rhythms and routines, and of Emily specifically with the patience and methodology of someone who was in absolutely no hurry. When officers went to his apartment, they found a desk in the corner of the main room. On the surface of that desk was a printed calendar. Every shift Emily had worked in the past 4 months was highlighted in yellow. Every single one, going back to the first week she had started at that location. Arranged beside the calendar was a folder. Inside the folder were 4 additional notes, each one on a small square of white paper folded into quarters, each one dated. 3 of them had been placed beneath different products on the shelves of aisle 4 at various points in the preceding months and had never been discovered. The 4th was dated from the very first Tuesday he had come in. He had been leaving notes for months before she ever found one. He had been watching her for months before she ever noticed him watching. And the bottle of vitamin C in aisle 4, the one he picked up and set back down every single Tuesday for 6 weeks, had been his way of keeping a kind of score. Investigators found that he had also kept a handwritten log in a small notebook in the desk drawer. It recorded the date of each visit, the time he arrived, the time he left, what Emily had been wearing, what section of the store she had been working in when he came through, and whether she had made eye contact. He had noted the specific curve of her handwriting on the pharmacy's chalkboard specials. He had noted the way she held the barcode scanner when she was distracted. He had noted on the Tuesday she called in sick that a different woman had been working the floor and that the store had felt, in his words, entirely wrong. Emily does not work in retail anymore. She does not work in any environment that requires her to be publicly visible to strangers at irregular hours. She says the hardest part to accept was not the notes, not the log, not even the knowledge that she had smiled at him dozens of times without knowing what those smiles were becoming in his mind. The hardest part was understanding that the store felt safe to her, because she knew it. She knew every aisle, every sound, every rhythm of that building. And she had been completely, utterly wrong about what was happening inside it. Story 3, 2 a.m. Knock Andrew is 28 years old and was working overnight at a small highway hotel when this happened. 38 rooms, a modest lobby, a single overnight staff member per shift. Himself. He had been on the job long enough to feel comfortable with the rhythms of the building, to know which guests tended to come in late, which ice machine ran noisier than the others, which exterior door had a handle that needed a firm pull to latch properly. He had developed the comfortable familiarity of a person who has spent many long, quiet hours inside the same 4 walls. At exactly 2 in the morning, a woman walked through the front doors. She was around 40 years old, well-dressed in the understated way of someone who traveled frequently and knew how to look presentable regardless of the hour. She moved without urgency and spoke with the measured calm of someone accustomed to handling minor inconveniences. She explained to Andrew that her car had broken down on the road just outside the property, that her phone had run completely out of battery, and that she needed to use the front desk phone to call for roadside assistance. Would that be all right? Andrew said yes. He slid the desk phone across the counter. She dialed, spoke briefly in a low and polite voice, said thank you, and handed the phone back. Then she moved to the lobby seating area and sat down in one of the chairs near the window to wait for whoever was coming. Andrew went back to his computer. There was nothing unusual about any of it. Broken down cars happened. Dead phone batteries happened. People sat in hotel lobbies, waiting for rides all the time. He had no reason to watch her. He had paperwork to get through, system checks to run, the routine work of keeping a building in order at 2 in the morning. At 2:17, he glanced up and the chair was empty. He looked toward the front doors. He assumed she had stepped outside to watch for her ride on the road, which was exactly what most people in that situation would do. He went back to the computer. At 2:32, a guest came to the front desk. Room 21 on the second floor. A man in his late 40s, clearly pulled from sleep, irritated in the way people get when they have an early morning ahead of them, and something has interrupted the few hours they had. He said that someone had knocked on his door twice in the last 10 minutes. Both times, he'd opened it. There was no one in the hallway. Andrew apologized. And while the guest stood there, he pulled up the camera footage from the second floor hallway and rewound it to 2:17, the moment Andrew had last seen the woman in the lobby. At 2:19, she appeared on the footage. She had taken the stairwell from the lobby to the second floor in the 2 minutes since Andrew had last seen her sitting in the chair, and now she was in the corridor, walking slowly, and she was not searching for a room number or looking at her phone the way a confused guest might. She was moving with deliberate, unhurried purpose from door to door along the hall. At each door she stopped, and she knocked. Once. A single quiet knock, not the knock of someone who expected a welcome, but the knock of someone testing whether a door would open. She had knocked on 7 doors before reaching the stairwell at the far end of the corridor and disappearing from the camera's frame. Andrew called their overnight security contact immediately, a retired officer named David who worked 4 nights a week. David was on the property within minutes and swept every floor. She was not on the second floor, she was not on the first. She was not in the lobby, the stairwells, the elevator, or any of the common areas. The exterior camera feeds showed no image of her leaving through any of the building's 4 exits. There was no footage of her walking out through the front doors, no footage of anyone matching her description, leaving through the side exits or the emergency door at the rear of the building. She had simply ceased to appear on any camera after that stairwell footage. 3 of the guests whose doors she had knocked on had opened them. 2 reported stepping out into an empty hallway. The third was the businessman in room 17, and his account was different. When he had opened his door, she was standing directly in front of it. Not down the hall, not retreating. Standing right there close enough that he could see her face clearly. She had asked him, in the same measured and polite voice that Andrew had heard at the front desk, if she could come inside because she had lost her key and was locked out of her room. He said no. He told her she would need to go to the front desk for assistance, and he closed the door. He said that what stayed with him, the thing he specifically mentioned when he came to the desk to report it the following morning, was her expression. He said she was smiling the entire time, from the moment he opened the door to the moment it closed. Not the reflexive, nervous smile of someone embarrassed to be asking a stranger to let them in, a fixed, settled smile that did not shift or change or respond to anything he said. A smile that was simply there, placed and held through the whole exchange. Andrew pulled the records for the desk phone after David's sweep turned up nothing. The number the woman had dialed when she used the front desk phone was disconnected. It had not connected to an active line. He checked the check-in logs for the full week of occupancy. She had never been a registered guest. No record of her name, no payment, no assigned room. She had come into the lobby, used the phone to call a number that did not connect, and sat down to wait. And then she had gone upstairs. Andrew spent a long time thinking about what she had been doing when she knocked on those 7 doors. He thought about it in the days after the incident, and he thinks about it still. She was not lost. She was not drunk or disoriented. She had navigated the building with clarity and purpose. She had chosen a quiet knock that wouldn't wake the whole floor, only the light sleepers or the already wakeful. She had waited at each door, and she had asked the one person who answered to let her in. He thinks about room 17. He thinks about the man who said no. He thinks about what might have been on the other side of a different answer. Story 4. The Watcher on the Lot. Sarah is 23 years old, and she had been working the overnight shift at a small convenience store for just under 3 months when this happened. 3 months is long enough to get comfortable, long enough to stop paying attention to the things that seemed strange in the first few weeks, and start taking for granted the things that seemed ordinary. Sarah knew her store. She knew which cooler door stuck. She knew the camera angles, the blind spots, the way the parking lot looked under the amber glow of the exterior lights at 2 a.m. versus 4. She knew what a normal night looked and felt like. And on the Saturday night in late autumn when this happened, or early Sunday morning, depending on how you count it, she would discover how quickly normal can become something else. Her coworker Ryan came in just after 2 a.m. He worked the day shift and wasn't on the schedule. He'd been out for dinner with a friend and stopped in on his way home for coffee, the way he sometimes did when he was passing by. He poured himself a cup, leaned against the counter, and chatted for a few minutes about nothing in particular. He was relaxed, unhurried, winding down from his evening. Before he left, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned that there was a car idling in the far corner of the parking lot. No headlights, engine running, just sitting there. Sarah looked toward the front windows. The far corner of the lot that Ryan was describing sat at an angle obscured by the building's exterior wall, a section of the lot that was not visible from inside the store, not from the register, not from the windows near the door. She had no sight line to it without physically going outside. She told him it was probably someone waiting on a delivery order. Ryan shrugged, finished his coffee, said goodnight, and left around 2:30. 20 minutes later, a woman came in from the road. Mid-40s, coat over pajamas, the expression of someone who had not planned to be out at this hour. She came to the counter, and before she had said anything about what she needed, she asked Sarah if that car in the lot was supposed to be there. Sarah went to the front door and looked. Dark-colored sedan, newer model, clean, no visible wear, no license plates, front or rear. The engine was running and the lights were completely off. The driver was barely visible in the dim ambient light from the store's exterior signage, just a shape, a figure behind the wheel, angled in a way that suggested he was watching the front entrance of the store. She kept her voice even and told the woman she would handle it. She called the non-emergency police line and reported the vehicle. The dispatcher noted it and said an officer would respond when one was available. Sarah stayed on the phone. The woman browsed the store slowly, not in any hurry to leave now. While Sarah was still on the call, a second car turned into the parking lot. She watched it through the window. Same general style as the first. Newer, dark-colored, no plates, no headlights. It pulled in, and instead of parking near the entrance the way any normal customer would, it moved to the far side of the lot and stopped there, positioning itself across the natural exit path. 2 cars, both without plates, both dark, both with their lights off, engines running, parked at opposite ends of the lot, while a young woman worked alone inside a small store in the middle of the night. The dispatcher was still on the line, when Sarah told her there was now a second vehicle and described its position. The dispatcher escalated the call. At 3:14 in the morning, the first car's engine revved. Both vehicles moved toward the lot exit in sequence. Not quickly, not with any appearance of alarm. Slowly, almost lazily, the way people leave, who have simply decided to go somewhere else. They turned onto the road in the same direction and were gone. An officer arrived 2 minutes later, confirmed the area was clear, and then walked the perimeter of the building with Sarah. At the base of the wall on the building's east side, flush against the exterior, directly beside the back entrance that Sarah used throughout her shift to access the stockroom, the officer stopped. He pointed at the ground. The soil along the base of the wall was soft from recent rain. In it were footprints. Not one set, but a sustained impression of weight. The kind that forms when a person stands in one spot for an extended period of time rather than simply passing through. Someone had been standing there, pressed against the side of the building in the dark, for long enough to leave that kind of mark. Not watching from a car, not visible from the lot or the road, standing directly beside the door that Sarah had been going in and out of all night to move stock, change displays, handle the routine work of running the store through the small hours. She had walked past that door dozens of times throughout her shift, out and back, stepping outside into the dark behind the building where the exterior light was weaker and the lot wasn't visible, and no camera covered the full angle. Someone had been standing there the whole time. There had not been 2 people in those cars. There had been at least 3, and at least one of them had not stayed in the vehicle. Sarah requested a transfer to the day shift the following week. Her manager approved it without question and without asking for much explanation, which told her something about how clearly it registered when he heard the summary of that night. She has not worked an overnight shift since. She says what she thinks about most often is not the cars, and not even the footprints. What she thinks about is the geometry of it. The way the parking spot was chosen specifically because it couldn't be seen from the register. The way the second car positioned itself across the exit. The way whoever had been standing beside the back door had known exactly which entrance to the building was not covered by an interior sightline. The specificity of it. The planning. They had been there before that night. They had observed the store. They knew its layout and its blind spots and its patterns. And they had chosen a Saturday when Sarah was alone and the lot was quiet to come back. Story 5. Under the desk. Matthew is 32 years old and worked the overnight shift at a small independent motel for nearly 4 years. 4 years is a long time to be alone in a building at night. Long enough to stop being unsettled by things that once unsettled you. The sounds become familiar. The particular groan of the building in wind, the refrigerator cycling in the back office, the specific creak of the second floor hallway when the temperature dropped. The rhythms become second nature. You develop an instinct for the place, a felt sense of what is normal and what isn't, a quiet confidence in your ability to read the building's moods the same way you might read the moods of someone you've known for years. Matthew thought he knew that motel. On a Wednesday evening in late autumn, the temperature outside was in the low 40s and falling. By the time he came on shift, the parking lot held 5 vehicles, all belonging to guests who had checked in during the evening hours and gone quietly to their rooms. The building settled into the deep stillness that Matthew had come to think of as its natural overnight state. The hum of the vending machine near the lobby entrance, the faint sound of the highway a quarter-mile distant, the slow tick of the clock on the wall behind the desk. All of it familiar, all of it right. He made himself comfortable in the back office, the small lounge behind the front desk that had a couch, a mini fridge, a wall-mounted television he rarely turned on, and the small speaker that chimed whenever someone pressed the bell at the front counter. He had eaten a sandwich, put on something low stakes on his laptop, and settled in for what felt like a typical Wednesday night. At 2 a.m, the bell rang. Matthew got up, walked out to the front lobby, and found it completely empty. No one at the desk, no one in the chairs, no one visible through the glass front doors. The road beyond the parking lot was dark and undisturbed. He stood behind the counter for a full minute in case someone was coming in late from the parking lot, just slow to reach the door. Nobody came. He walked outside and looked across the lot. All 5 guest vehicles sat where they had been all evening, dark and still. He went back inside and told himself it was the building. Old structures made sounds. The bell had a simple mechanical mechanism, and it wasn't impossible for it to trip on its own. He had worked in this building for 4 years, and nothing like this had ever happened. But that didn't mean it couldn't. He went back to the office. 12 minutes later, the bell rang again. He moved faster this time, out to the lobby in seconds. Still empty. He went to the exterior doors and pushed through them, let the cold air hit him, and scanned the lot with his phone's flashlight. He walked the full perimeter of the building's front face, checked both sides of the entrance, looked into the shadows along the exterior walls. The parking lot was still. The road was empty. The night was silent except for the distant sound of the highway. He went back inside, and this time he did not go to the back office. He sat down at the front desk. If someone was coming in and pressing the bell and leaving, a prank, a bored guest, someone's teenager, he was going to be sitting right there when it happened. He dimmed the lobby light slightly so the interior was softer, less obviously occupied from the outside, and he settled into the chair and watched. He watched the bell on the counter. He watched the front doors. He watched the corridor entrance, and the seating area, and the vending machines, and every visible corner of the lobby. For 22 minutes, nothing happened. The clock ticked on the wall. The refrigerator in the back office hummed. The building breathed. Matthew sat very still and watched the bell and did not look away from it. 22 minutes, and then the familiar gravity of a quiet building at 2 a.m. pulled at his eyelids, and he felt himself begin, against his will, to soften. Not to sleep, not exactly, but to loosen, to let the vigilance ease back just slightly. It had been nearly half an hour. If someone had been playing a prank, they were gone. If the bell had been misfiring, it seemed to have stopped. The night was quiet, and it was going to stay quiet, and he would feel a little foolish in the morning, telling this story to the day shift staff. The bell rang. Matthew did not look at the door. He did not look at the lobby. He looked directly at the bell because he was sitting directly in front of it, and what he saw was a hand. It rose from below the counter, from beneath the desk surface, from the space between the desk and the floor that he had been sitting directly above for 22 minutes. Slowly, with complete and terrible deliberateness, a pale hand fingers extended, rising up over the edge of the counter with the unhurried certainty of something that had been waiting a very long time for the right moment. One finger extended and pressed the bell. Then the hand withdrew, dropping back below the surface of the desk as smoothly and quietly as it had appeared. Matthew has no precise memory of the next 30 seconds. What he knows is that he was in the back office with the door locked before those 30 seconds were over. What he knows is that he was against the back wall with the door at his shoulder and his phone in his hand and his chest heaving. What he knows is that he had dialed emergency services and was speaking to a dispatcher before he had any clear, conscious memory of having done so. The dispatcher's voice came through the phone steady and even, telling him to stay in the room and stay on the line, and that officers were on the way. And Matthew stood against the wall and watched the security monitors mounted beside the back office desk and tried to remember how to breathe. On the lobby camera, a figure crawled out from beneath the front desk. He came out slowly, hands and knees, and he stayed low for a moment before he stood. Tall, dark hooded sweatshirt with the hood drawn tight. He straightened to full height and stood in the lobby with the unhurried posture of a man who was in no particular rush to be anywhere. He turned his head toward the front doors and looked at them for a moment, the way you look at a window when you're thinking about the weather. Then he turned and looked toward the hallway that led to the back office, and he walked toward it. Matthew heard the footsteps in the hallway, slow and evenly spaced. He heard them stop on the other side of the locked door. He watched the door handle turn once, a slow rotation that stopped when the latch held. Then it stopped. The footsteps did not move away immediately. Matthew stood with his back against the door and did not make a sound and did not breathe for what felt like a very long time. The dispatcher said his name softly through the phone, and he could not answer. Eventually, the footsteps moved away. On the monitor, he watched the figure walk back out to the lobby, moving slowly around the space as if he owned it. He stopped at the brochure rack near the entrance and turned the display with one hand, flipping through the tourism pamphlets and local restaurant cards, the way a person does in a waiting room when they've run out of anything better to do. He stood at the front doors again and looked out at the parking lot. Then he walked back toward the vending machines and stopped there for a moment. Through the parking lot camera, Matthew saw the first pulse of red and blue lights at the far edge of the lot, still a distance out. The figure on the lobby camera stopped. He turned toward the doors, and he moved, not running, not panicking, but efficiently and immediately gone from the frame. 2 officers entered the building and swept every room, every floor, every corner of the property. They found the lobby empty and the desk undisturbed. Along the building's east side, they found a side door that was not fully latched. Wedged beneath it, holding it a 1/4 inch open from the outside, was a piece of cut wood, smooth-edged and precisely sized, placed there by someone who had known exactly which door to prop, who had taken the time to cut something to the right dimensions for the purpose, who had prepared this entrance before Matthew ever came on shift. The figure was gone. Officers checked the road, the surrounding area, the tree line past the parking lot. No one was found. No cameras had captured his face with enough clarity to use. He left no identification behind. He was simply gone, as thoroughly and efficiently as he had arrived. Matthew sat in the back office until his shift ended at 6 in the morning, watching the lobby on the monitor and not taking his eyes from it. He says the hardest part of that night was not the hand rising from beneath the desk, as viscerally terrifying as that moment was. It was the calculation it represented. To be under that desk when Matthew sat down, the figure would have had to be in position before he came out of the back office to investigate the bell. He would have had to hear Matthew come into the lobby the first time and the second time and remain completely silent and completely still while Matthew stood 3 feet away, looking at an empty room. He would have had to crouch in the dark below a desk in a motel lobby for an unknown stretch of time before Matthew even sat down above him. Matthew sat above him for 22 minutes. He says he does not think 22 minutes is the real number. He says when he plays it back and tries to remember the timing, when he thinks about how long he was in the back office before the first bell and how long between the first and second and all of it, he thinks the man was under that desk for much longer than 22 minutes. He thinks he was there when Matthew came on shift. He thinks he may have been there when Matthew made his sandwich and put on his laptop and settled in for what felt like a typical Wednesday night. He thinks about what it means that someone could be that still, that quiet, that patient, that willing to wait in the dark for as long as it took. Matthew gave his notice the following week. He said it wasn't the fear of it happening again, though there was that too. It was something more specific, more difficult to name. He said it was the realization that he had spent 4 years developing a felt sense of that building. 4 years of reading its sounds and its moods and its rhythms until he felt completely at home inside it. And somewhere in that building, on a night that felt completely ordinary, that sense had been entirely wrong. Something had been there that he could not see and could not hear and could not feel. And his 4 years of experience had not protected him from a single moment of it. He says he thinks about the hand sometimes, the slowness of it, the way it rose over the edge of the counter with no urgency and no alarm, just a finger extended to press a bell. The way it withdrew. He says that's the part he cannot explain, not the danger. Well, he understands the danger. What he cannot explain is the patience, the willingness to crouch in the dark beneath a desk in an empty building and do nothing, wait for nothing, move toward nothing, for however long it took. He says it didn't feel like desperation. It didn't feel impulsive or reckless or opportunistic. It felt, in the way that the footage and the cut wood and the slow turn of the door handle all felt, completely and quietly planned. And that, he says, is the part that still follows him. 5 people, 5 ordinary nights, 5 human beings who clocked into a building expecting the particular routine of the overnight hours and discovered in completely different ways that empty does not mean safe, that quiet does not mean alone, that the familiarity of a place you know well can become, in a single moment, the most disorienting feeling in the world, because familiar means you stopped watching, and that is exactly what someone was waiting for. These are real people. Their names have been changed and their details adjusted for their privacy, but the core of each account is true. The confusion, the slow dawning recognition that something is wrong, the specific kind of fear that comes not from something jumping out of the dark, but from understanding, gradually and with horrible clarity, that someone has been there all along. That is real. That is what they lived through. If you work the night shift, we see you. If you have ever sat in a quiet building at 2 a.m. and felt something shift in the air without being able to name it, we see you. Trust that feeling. It is not paranoia. It is your mind doing exactly what it is built to do. If this episode stayed with you, leave us a like, leave a comment, and tell us which story hit you hardest and where in the world you are watching from tonight. We genuinely want to know. If you are not yet part of the Silent Fear family, subscribe now and hit the bell so you never miss what we put out each week. We put everything into this channel, and your support is what keeps it going. We will be back next week with more true stories from the hours most people never see. Until then, keep the lights on. Silent Fear. Where true stories find the dark,